Fish farming, the commercial production of fish in enclosures such as ponds, tanks or cages. Fish farming is the most common form of aquaculture and commonly involves Nile perch, tilapia and catfish in Uganda. Fisheries in Uganda are mainly carried out in open water sources and provide an important source of livelihood for many people. It's considered one of the fastest growing agribusinesses in Uganda today for its uniqueness, availability of resources like natural water bodies and the lucrative revenue development from the venture. Fish consumption has undergone major changes in the past 4 decades. World apparent per capita fish consumption has been increasing steadily, from an average of 9.9 kilograms in the 1960s to 11.5 kilograms in the 1970s, 12.5 kilograms in the 1980s, 14.4 kilograms in the 90s, and reaching 20.4 kilograms in the recent years, creating a global increase in demand for the product. It's highly marketable and remains the second highest foreign exchange earner for Uganda. However, Uganda shares only 0.2% of the EU fresh fish market share. This is negligible compared to the other Nile perch exporting countries and possesses a challenge of how we can grow this market share. At such a demand but limited supply is where the opportunity for our Seeds of Gold grows tonight. Coming up on Seeds of Gold.
We opted for cage system because it allows maximum production within a very small space. For instance, in one production cage, we can target to get 7 tons, and that is just a square meter, which you can't get out in other systems. Different markets target different sizes of fish. If you have maybe a market that needs fish that are around 300 grams, it can take you 4 months to sell your fish.
Pearl Aquatics is a business dealing in growing fish on a commercial scale. Established in 2015, the site has been built to grow Nile tilapia in floating cages on the shores of Lake Victoria, raising from 2 cages to 8 cages, stocking up to 5,000 fish. Faith, the technical manager at the plant, takes us through what is required to manage such a venture to capacity.
Pearl Aquatics does the grow out of fish, specifically Nile tilapia fish, in a system called cages. Cages are installed within a water body. For example, here, our cages are in Lake Victoria. We grow tilapia fish right out from the juvenile stage at the size of 1.5 grams until harvest period. Pearl Aquatics specializes in growing tilapia fish because of the fish species that we are culturing in Uganda. Nile tilapia species is the most suitable species to be cultured in cages because of its basic characteristics. Firstly, it can be able to withstand the high densities within low volumes that we consider in fish cages. Then secondly, it does well with feeds that are floating. And in feeding fish, if any fish can be able to be depending on floating feeds, it helps a farmer to be able to monitor.
Lake Victoria's fish stocks are struggling to keep up with the demand. For instance, stocks and catches of Nile perch have reduced. These challenges to natural fish stocks are compounded by overfishing, illegal and unregulated fishing activities. This is where the idea of the cage system of fish farming for aquaponics was birthed.
We opted for cage system because it allows maximum production within a very small space, small volume of water. And for instance, in one production cage, we can target to get 7 tons, and that is just a square meter in just an area of 60 meters by 6, and the depth being 60 meters, which you can't get out in other systems. Like for instance, when you compare it with pond, you can't stock all that much fish in a pond system.
You will require 3 things to consider before starting a cage system: the fry quality, the feed resource, and the infrastructure. Faith breaks down each one of them.
To do fish cage farming, you require a high quality seed or fry. A high quality seed fry is guaranteed from the licensed hatcheries that we have in Uganda. For instance, there are those hatcheries that are known and registered and licensed by the National Fisheries Resources and Research Institute. Actually, before you stock fish, you must be having feed ready in your store. And those fish must be, the feed must be the required size for the targeted fish to feed. For instance, if I get fish of 1 gram, I need feed that is small size, and small size feeds has high protein content. For instance, 1 gram fish will eat big crumble size of feed. So a farmer requires a reliable supplier of feed, high quality feed. It will contain all the basic requirements for growth, so that he may be able to get the best performance. Feed suppliers supply different feeds. For example, here at Aquatics, we've used cow day's feed supplied by Kafika. For example, our fish of around 50 grams is fed on 1 millimeter of Kafika feed. And you might find that a fish of 50 grams is feeding on a different size according to a different company. So a farmer must be able to understand which size of feed do I need for my targeted size of fish. Fish requires high protein levels, unlike other animals. If you compare it with piggery will maybe do much with bran, carbohydrates. But with fish feed specifically, we look at how much is the protein content in that feed. So it's not really advisable to feed your fish on animal wastes.
Cage culture is one among other forms of keeping fish. It utilizes existing water resources, but encloses the fish in a cage or basket, which allows water to pass freely between the fish and the pond, permitting water exchange and water removal into the surrounding water. This is very important for the fish survival, as Faith explains.
A cage system is a system of growing fish that involves getting a mesh net and you install it in water. These meshes are tied on cage frames. They can be plastic or they can be locally made fabricated metals. At Aquatics, we have a system that is imported. We are using Chinese cages, and these cages are low volume, high density, meaning that we stock high density fish in a low volume of space. Particularly here we have a 6 meter by 6 meter square cage, and in that cage we stock in fish at a stocking density of 80 fish per meter cubed.
While feeding is important to the production of quality fish, in order to stock up enough feeds for the fish, one ought to understand the production stages of their fish, from the fry or fingerlings to the adult fish.
I normally receive fry at 1.5 gram size, and I stock it in a juvenile cage. So it takes it 1.5 months to move from the juvenile stage, from fry stage to juvenile stage. That is relatively from 1.5 grams to 15 to 20 grams. It takes 1.5 months. Then from 15 to 20 grams, the fish are transferred from a juvenile cage into a production cage. In a production cage, that's where fish grow up to the table size or up to sales day. And that takes about 6 months.
Fish farming is a fast-growing, lucrative business, highly because of the raised consumption that comes with a readily available market, both locally and overseas. The fish demands, however, vary in terms of size and quality depending on the market. In Uganda, one should mind the following aspect when growing your fish.
Fish takes about 8 months from the fry stage up to the adult size, which is now the 500 grams. We grow our fish up to 500 grams basing on the market that we have. Our markets need fish that are between 350 to 500 grams. However, we also have markets that can take fish that are below to 350 grams. But it costs the farmer if you sell your fish at a young stage. Reason being, at young stage they are feeding on a feed that is slightly more expensive, and then they are still growing at a faster rate. So if you terminate the growth chain, you lose out. So you have to grow your fish at least above 350 grams.
Up next, is fish farming profitable? What operational costs require more attention to break through? We now take a look at the daily routines of a fish farmer.
Feeding is a daily activity we do on farm because every day fish must eat. We do our feeding only during the day and we do not feed at night. So every morning we get feed from the store and we take it to the cages to feed the fish. Each particular cage has got its own number of fish, and they might be of different sizes, so they feed differently. They might feed on different types of feeds, and also they might feed on different quantities of feed. If, for instance, a particular cage is supposed to eat 20 kilograms in a day, we divide that ration into 4 times, and we feed the fish 4 times in a day. We feed our fish by broadcasting. We use scoops to get fish feeds out of the fish bags, and we broadcast them on the targeted cage. After doing the feeding, we are supposed to take the records. You have to keep track of how much feed did I give. You must keep track of how much feed did I feed a particular cage in a certain day. And you must also record how was the response of the fish to the feed I fed the fish. By doing so, it must be recorded daily. We have our daily record sheets which must be filled. You must also record how was the weather. Sometimes we take the temperature, dissolved oxygen and the pH parameters of the water to understand what was taking place the time when we are feeding. So you must keep all those records. Before you feed your fish, you must first observe whether fish are, first of all, in a cage. You might go to feed fish and you find maybe they escaped. So you must be very observant. You put 1 scoop at a time to observe the response. We feed the fish according to the response. If they are not responding, we do not feed the fish. For instance, there are times when the water is very cold, under low temperatures, the response is very poor. So we tend to reduce our targeted feed amounts into lower values. From my experience with feeding fish, there are times when you feed fish and it is not responding to feed. It might not be weather, but also the feed quality. We've had feeds from different sources. You buy a feed, you feed it to the fish, and they do not respond at all.
Apart from the daily routines, there will be quarterly checks that we do to ensure safety, sustainability, and mitigate risks ahead. These are what faith checks on a monthly basis.
Like at least every end of the month, we sample the fish to establish the average body weight. So as you also know the total biomass within a particular cage, that helps you to know how much feed should I be able to introduce in the next month to a particular cage. So we do sampling every end of the month, and Amidst that, sometimes we do other operational activities like transfers. You've received fry from a hatchery, you have to stock them in a juvenile cage, and we also transfer these fish from a juvenile cage into a production cage. Those are among other activities that lie within the monthly activities. We also do harvests. Sometimes when we have like fish that are ready and we have clients who are ready, we sell our fish both to the local and the international market.
It's common practice for startup farmers, especially with low seed capital, to want to depend on available resources like chicken dropping and pig wastes as fish feed. But how different is working around already manufactured feeds versus locally made feeds? Could there be any possible harm to the latter practice?
Every farmer out there should get to know that there is a difference between being a farmer and being a feed manufacturer. So if you try to do your feeding by making your own on-farm made feeds, first of all, most locally made feeds are not extruded. By extruding, I mean the feeds we are using are able to float because they pass through a machine called an extruder, and it's incorporated in some holes so they can float on water. So if you do your own feed on farm, the high chances that it will be a sinking feed. And when you put it in a cage, you're not able to watch your fish feeding on the feed. So the feeds are going to sink to the bottom, and tilapia, being a fish that requires floating feeds, it might not do well with the sinking feeds. And at the end of the day, those feeds can stay at the bottom of the cage, and then they can rot from there.
At Cow Days, we have fish feeds of various fish size stages, ranging from the powder that is 40% crude protein to the micro pellets or 0.5, 0.8 to 1 mm, which are also 40% crude protein, to the 2 mm, which is 35% crude protein, to the 3 mm, which is also 30% crude protein, to the 4 and the 6 mm, which are 27% crude protein. All the fish feeds we have comprise of essential nutrients that are vital for fish growth at every stage that fish is at. Our feeds fully float for about 30 minutes. However, the recommended period of time for floating of the feeds is about 15 minutes.
Choosing to feed your fish on the other animal byproducts like poultry droppings, like piggery, like abattoir wastes, they do not have all the basic requirements for growth. Like for instance, also the chicken has got out the ingredients from that particular feed, and then you're feeding the final dropping onto your fish. It means that it will lack some specific requirements. If you get a feed that is of poor quality, yes, you're going to grow your fish. Fish might eat the feed, but they always take long in the production cycle. That's why you find incidences of a farmer growing fish for up to 2 years, and they're not yet even half a kilogram each fish. So the best, if you have a high quality feed, you're sure that you're going to get higher growth rates, and you harvest your fish in the shortest period of time possible.
Is fish farming profitable with all the operations in check?
In a cage farming system, feeds represent about 60 to 70% of the operational costs. For instance, what we aim at is achieving the best FCR. FCR refers to food conversion ratio. How much food do I need to attain 1 kilogram of feed? The best FCR would be 1, but practically it's impossible to that. If you feed 1 kilogram of feed, you will get 1 kilogram of fish at harvest. So we normally target at least the FCR of 1.2 to around 1.4. So that for you to get 1 kilo of fish at harvest, you have put in at least 1.2 kilograms of feed. So it will be able to give you the accounts of how much do I buy a kilogram of feed. For instance, at Cow Days, the Cow Days feed, a kilogram can be averagely at 4,200. If I'm feeding my fish at 1.2, it means that I would have fed my fish I must have used 5,040 shillings to produce 1 kilogram of fish. And currently the target market is at averagely 8,000 per kilogram of fish. So you can be able to balance the profit margin between how much you bought the feed and then how much you're selling your fish. Production capacity can be 7 tons from each cage. So if your customer is taking like 8 tons, means that I am able to harvest a full cage. What you do, you go and get out the fish from the whole cage. We seine through the cage and we get fish from the cage. We put it in a harvesting boat and we bring it to the shoreline. At the showers, that fish is weighed. We count the fish and weigh it. And then the customer normally comes with an ice truck and packs the fish in ice. We normally get casual laborers. They come once in a while, they come and pack the fish on the ice, and then we load to the truck.
Today, aquaponics is able to maximize profit by managing all operational costs with a minimal but very functional approach. This, however, does not come easy. There are still a couple of challenges the farm faces.
Farming, like any other farming enterprise, has got some challenges. Mainly, the main challenge would be on the feed, specifically the feed quality. You might get a feed that is not of good quality. Then also the availability of the feed. Most of the feeds we are using are imported. So sometimes you don't get a reliable supplier. You have to make orders like 3 months prior to the usage. Then also there is also a challenge of seed. The fish fry is produced in seasons at different hatcheries. That sometimes when you order fish and there is no fly, so it becomes challenging for you. You might not meet your own target of stocking your cages. Then also security is also a concern. So we employ a team of people who keep our fish. They work day and night to make sure that the fish are safe. But we've had instances of fish maybe were stolen. Weather affects this fish farming business because cages are in the lake. You cannot control it. For instance, there are seasons when we have lake mixing, Kalilo. If you wake up in the morning and you find the high mortalities on a cage, fish have died, and you do not have any control over it. The lake was mixing. The warmer waters are going to the bottom and the cold waters on top. So the temperature shock kills the fish in a cage. So it happens. Sometimes weather affects our operations. There are days when we don't feed because it has maybe rained the whole day or because the waves are very strong on the lake. So weather really sometimes affects the production, but in our Uganda, in our tropical regions, it's not much of a challenge.
Watching out for these shortcomings will additionally help you mitigate the risk, after which you can reap endlessly from fish farming.